Is it on yet? Are people looking at me? Must be time to blow my nose. The title of the Dharma talk this morning is what?
When we conclude.
When we conclude. When we conclude. We're concluding all the time, one way or another. So when we conclude, we come to a conclusion based on other conclusions and other various bric-a-brac or objects or ideas or situations or statements of not only our own but others, and sometimes that's very helpful and very supportive and leads to more conclusions and more results, and sometimes favorable, sometimes not so favorable. But when I teach, sometimes I say don't conclude, and I'm not saying that you should never conclude anything again, but when I say that, and if you listen and you have an interest in what I'm saying, then you might look at the way in which something happens, this happens, that happens, 3 or 4 other things happen, and we actually turn away from it by concluding. Something happens in our consciousness that we know something. We actually know that. We conclude it. It may have relative accuracy, quite often has quite a bit of that. And in the mundane world, that separation, what it fundamentally is, might be, what would be the word, premature or too soon. Don't conclude. Allow conclusions, don't get in the way of conclusions, but they need to come out of your awareness rather than your completely circular thought process. Circularity, thought process is excellent if we're talking about things that are just material. When we start to the further we get away from fire, earth, water, and air, and what is the other one? Metal and wood, depends on what country you're in. The more we're covering up what our fundamental nature actually is, and the more we get estranged from a fundamental situation that we all are and all have, or however you want to say it. And that is the simple way I put it is we're not separate from each other. Separated all over the place. So when we conclude, sometimes the intention is to deeper understand something, be more clear, get something to start moving along. It needs to happen, this needs to happen, that needs to happen. So we might have to kind of energize the conclusion part, get that to happen, push on this a little bit, bring this to a close. What are all the other terms that talk about that? But if the conclusion is has a basis in wanting to control either this or anyone else or any other thing, or it's based on that kind of a power thing, which sometimes is very subtle, or if it's based on fear, fear of an open dimension, one of them being just not knowing. We get habituated to not allowing any gaps or space. We want to fill that up with something, even if it's only, we don't have enough proof yet, or whatever other kind of politics of experience start to arise. So this is a teaching that I talk to people in this way, and also personally. It takes on a different tone or quality or tenor when I'm talking to an individual, because then I'm relating to them the way in which they're expressing if they even come to me at all, the way in which they're expressing their difficulty or confusion, then I might respond to them in a different way based on it's a mutual thing, trying to see what's happening and see how I can help them without interfering with them. And if I come to a conclusion, this is what it looks like. I know something. Anytime you know anything, you ignore everything else. It's sure you could argue with that. People much more intelligent, and I'm not just false. I don't have any false humility. I don't have any humility, but I'm just saying people much more intelligent than I am and good at handling concepts and ideas could come take issue with this, and I would lose because I'm not interested in concluding. That being said, if the dimension in which your consciousness, if it is not attached to, enamored of, and in love with some kind of self or some kind of identity, or you're not protecting the me feeling from something, then that consciousness, that awareness doesn't belong to anyone. It's not to say it doesn't have reference points. There's a whole body-mind complex, of course, is a reference point, but it moves with that reference point rather than clings to it. So I have more to say, but I'm also very interested in responding to questions. I like to, the way I talk, I like to do it with people. If no one asks any questions, then the talk that I give is pretty flat. Yes.
Earlier you said knowing is coming to a conclusion.
Again, please.
Earlier you said knowing something is coming to a conclusion.
I know that. That's a conclusion. Knowing something has just a feeling of knowing. You're still in the state of receiving. If you're just receiving, then you know, but it's like you know there are ducks swimming across the lake. I mean, it's a silly metaphor, but I don't have any other kind. So you know that's occurring, but you may not be going into the whys and wherefores and why are they doing that, why are they swimming that way, and all of the other things that can stack up to bring you to some kind of conclusion. So it's still in the perception stage. More?
So when we say I know, are we not receiving?
And it's dependent on all the other things that are happening in anyone's particular personal chemistry of passion, aggression, ignorance, how much you're operating out of fear, even if it's a low level where no one else may know it, but you're fearful of something and you may not know what it is, and when you start to go towards it to see what it is, you don't want to do that. You don't want to go there. It can be frightening. Go ahead. More?
How can we be receiving and also know something at the same time?
So when the knowing is not, it doesn't solidify into like an opinion. There's still an openness there that if something changes just slightly, then your knowing relaxes. Your receiving changes slightly, because it's always, to use a common metaphor, it's always kind of dancing with everything. So it's movement. But if everything is congealing or solidifying into an opinion or an idea, I know this is some kind of proof, then the receptivity starts to shut down. The extreme forms of this we can see in our government and our system of laws, and that are operating out of extreme materialism. It's not wrong. We have to start somewhere, but it's difficult to find any openness there. If openness does show up, it usually shows up in the form of a personality that has a deep understanding, and then they would come into that political arena of laws and so on, and function as kind of be able to ventilate that whole structure a little bit. Sometimes they're called liberals. I don't think that's necessarily workable to come to a conclusion about anything anybody's doing. We do that so that we can have some kind of control. So, and interestingly enough, when we come to any conclusion, so we can stop looking at it. The self-centered mind, the ego mind, feels threatened by anything that is showing up as some kind of phenomenological situation, and we don't know what it is. We feel threatened, so we come to an opinion about it. Hearing noises in the other room, like we talked about the other day, it's just like we just come to some kind of a conclusion about it. So it's not so much about not coming to conclusions, although I say that. It's about seeing, if you just watch the conclusion happen, then there's still there's still a lot of space around that, so that it's very easy to, if things do change, as they say, turn on a dime, then we're right with that. We're moving in a way. We're not solidifying this into some kind of a need to be right, need to be correct, need to protect ourselves, and so on. It's an area to work with in your awareness, with your awareness, rather than coming to conclusions, including what I'm saying. Include, yes.
You were describing.
How are you feeling?
Much better.
Good.
How are you feeling?
About the same. Go ahead.
The way you're just describing knowing, the knowing that can dance with things,
Yes.
is that different than just receiving?
I think the idea with just receiving is just a kind of an attitude that whatever comes, we're not going to fight with it or argue with it. We're also not going to look away from it. It's difficult, especially if it's an emotion that's coming out of your, whatever this is, consciousness, that is difficult, that we don't know where it's coming from. It's like a door opens somewhere in the darkness and something comes rumbling out of there, and we start to not feel so good, or we feel threatened. And so, what was the question?
Is the knowing that is dancing with things different than just receiving?
Yes. So that part of it would be receiving. Once you're receiving, then from there, to not add to that, subtract from that, or meddle with it at all, no politics around it at all, then there could be something that could be said to be a dance. Dancing with your own negative emotions. I don't know if you can do that intellectually. I mean, I'm not saying you can't, but it looks to me, and I'm kind of biased in this area, that you might need to sit down, hold still, and spend quite a number of hours, weeks, months, years, seeing the way you refuse who you are. We turn away. I wouldn't know this if I hadn't spent many, many years not wanting to be who I was, not wanting to be this manifestation, have these ears, these thought patterns, this bias, this kind of emotion coming from here, from there. You don't have to get rid of anything, my friends. If you try to get rid of something, I don't care what it is, it will do something bad. Michael.
If we stop adding, subtracting, or looking away from our negative emotions, are they still negative?
Could be. Actually, you can't stop doing that. But I say stop. When I say that, I'm saying, because I know if I say that, then we'll, if you're listening to me, then we'll begin to look at that, and we'll notice that we can't quite do that. We can't quite. So you can move that, what I just said, in with your question.
Not right now, maybe.
Questions are good. Okay, questions are bad. Shut up.
Often when you say not to do something, you usually say that no, we can't help but do that, so like not conclude. But you say that the conclusion should come out of our awareness instead of our thought process. How can we know the difference between those?
So when I say, I'm not eliminating the thought process, the idea to use it's more like rearranging the priorities. So you're leading with your awareness more than, and your openness more than your ideas, opinions, and plans and schemes that can be there. You don't have to get rid of them. Don't have to get rid of anything. But just the priority. When the priority is, when you start to lead with your awareness, is more of a feeling of not knowing what the hell you're doing or what you're going to do. This doesn't mean you don't have a plan to, get groceries on Friday afternoon. And how do you know it's a plan? As you've heard me say many times, it won't work. Plans never work. But something happens, we always have to modify something because things are changing. If you force it to work, then you're not particularly dancing with things. So that whole area of the thought, of the awareness and the thought process, this is what we begin to discover by sitting on the cushion, sitting down, holding, call it meditation, call it awareness practice, call it chikantaza, but whatever you call it, do it. Sit down, hold still, and watch the phenomena play. Watch the emotions, ideas, thoughts, memories, hopes, fears, commentary, comic books. You know, just, and don't object, don't agree, and don't look away. Yes?
You said don't get in the way of conclusions. What does a conclusion look like when we've gotten out of the way?
You'll notice that it's not totally accurate. You may. You feel there's a conclusion coming up, and you've gotten out of the way. You're not fighting with it, but you've noticed that its half-life is, its ability to maintain it's impermanent. The causes and conditions are changing constantly. More?
A conclusion coming out of awareness rather than the thought process. Would that be, when we say conclusion, I think of it as a static thing, so would it still be static? If it's
out of awareness, no. Could be conclusive. To use a very simple example, it would be looking at someone who had committed a crime and concluding they're criminal and concluding they need to be locked up, they need to be punished, you need to call the police. But maybe doing it another way where there was less conclusiveness happening and you had to say so about the situation, which we don't, of course. It's the nature of the society or culture we're in. You might look at the situation, and instead of concluding, you might look deeper and not conclude, deeper and not conclude. And anything conclusion that needs to come out will be, I wouldn't say forced upon you, but will be like obvious, choiceless. It's obvious. They had a gun. They hurt something. They killed somebody or something. So you can't help. Those are just conclusive. There is that. But then looking deeper and looking deeper. If you look deep enough, you actually see that you go deep and you realize that the causes and conditions that arise are unsearchable, but we need to search it as far as we can so we can realize that there's no praise and no blame. You start praising anything or blaming anything, you're shutting down on the depth that is available to you all the time. People that are antisocial criminals or something like that there's deep causes and conditions that go back, and I don't know how else to say this other than beyond this life. And those are ignored, and because we conclude, because we like control, we like to be in the know, we like to be the ones that are powerful and that we're able to lord it over others, or however you want to say it. But if you were to just do it with awareness, you wouldn't lock anybody up. You would help them. And how would you do that? By watching who they were, how they functioned. It would be much easier to protect other people from that situation fundamentally and totally, because you wouldn't put them in a box with a lot of other people with great difficulties, so they could all get together and create more difficult situations, and then get out and continue on their path of confusion and passion, aggression, and ignorance. So you would actually fundamentally help that person. Just a way of talking about it. Go ahead.
How does praise shut down our investigation?
Well, you could do that as long as you understand what that is, that really nobody really gets credit for anything. Like, as gorgeous as I am, I can't get credit if I go look in the mirror and say, I did this. I'm the one who made these beautiful ears and this great forehead. I'm being silly, obviously, but it's like that. If you look at your ability to do something, and look at the self-centeredness that arises in that area. Sometimes it's very subtle. You might be the only one that knows how much narcissism is going on with you. You may be so good at covering that up, and you may not be trying to cover it up. It's just that are very, very clear that other people are going to be on to you if you start bragging about yourself. And how do you work with that? Don't get rid of it. Don't try not to be. Some people come and say, well, isn't that just egotistical? And they're missing the point. It's not about getting rid of something that is unreal. It is about seeing that it's unreal. This is an extremely narcissistic, self-centered consciousness that you're listening to through these vocal cords. I could not talk about this if I hadn't looked at it deeply. Sometimes I say, nothing has changed. And people might say, well, it looks like you've changed quite a bit since you were young. But fundamentally, nothing's changed. Yes?
Is appreciation different from praise?
Yes. Praise is this, and appreciation is more receiving. You can appreciate something without the situation you're appreciating even being aware of it. So it's not about you, it's just about receiving. Appreciation, like they say, people misunderstand that word, and it's probably because I've redefined it and Webster's hasn't caught up with me yet. But it's about receiving. It's about whatever it is, no matter how horrible, ugly, smelly it is, to appreciate that means to receive that in all of its ugliness. This is what it's when you see. I was talking about the artist yesterday, and this is one who begins to understand about this in a deep way, and and begins to live as a creator, as a poet, as a writer. Inevitably, if you start working with this material in a fundamental way, you're going into a spiritual journey, and you may have a teacher, you may not, but it's a spiritual path, and this is why it can be so difficult, because all of the things that are trailing behind you, called your karma, are still tagging along, nipping at your heels. So if you don't have some way of working with it, you might be a tremendous artist in some area because you really work hard at that, but you also might collapse into the karma that you keep refusing as you create great symphonies or something. So it's very interesting the way artists don't get any help. There's no one teaching that. I'm not saying there isn't. I don't know anyone. Yes, Shoto.
You brought up the with like praise and blame, saying how we don't have any credit for like our ears and our face, and it seems like that's a lot easier to understand, even in a materialistic way. That most people would agree with that. Are we able to see stuff like having talents or picking up an instrument or some other ability that we seem to have some kind of say-so over? Can we see that in the same way?
I feel that you could, but it might take a while. But it's about looking at what we do is sit down, hold still, and watch how the mind keeps in a deep level. It's like going down into the internal aspect of any situation, going down into the basement, going down into the boiler room, and looking at how that works. Sitting meditation, hold still, takes a long time usually, and to go down, and all you have to do is understand how it works to see that. Don't fight with that. Don't try to be artificially better. Don't use the misunderstanding of causes and conditions to try to polish a piece of feces. See what it is, and then then it finds its own dimension. Even your own anger, your own, if you want to call it depression, or it needs to find out where it needs to be, where it needs to be, instead of giving it some kind of credential by pushing on it, either pushing with your consciousness or pushing on it with chemicals. Don't misunderstand. I'm not saying you shouldn't use, ibuprofen or Prozac or Wellbutrin. Or sure, we should relate to what things as we see them. Do what you need to do. But you could add in an awareness practice. Sit down, hold still, watch the movement in wherever it's at, in any of the six sense fields, including the mind. Watch how it arises and watch where it goes, if you can see that. And then at some point you will watch what's watching. If you can do that, if you find something there, come and tell me about it. Further questions? You.
If we have an emotion is starting to congeal, we do anything to keep some kind of dance going?
You don't have to keep a dance going. So just see the way you, if you see the way you obstruct, if you see the way you push, then just the awareness itself will clarify. There isn't any one. The issue seems to be, the way this seems to work is if you try to modify or meddle with what you're looking at, the assumption is that there's somebody who can fix that, and there isn't anyone. There needs to be clarity about what your actual identity is. I say over and over again, find out who you are. I can tell you who you are. And just in a couple of words, I've been saying it for quite a number of years. You're not separate from anything. You are not a discrete individual. There are aspects of your experience that show up that way, of course. There's a body that's been born, completely made of food. This isn't made of anything other than just food. You have to eat other living things in order for you to continue to live. It's not a crime. It's the way this whole place works. And to think that somebody is better because they eat leaves instead of animal carcasses is incorrect. That being said, if you want to do this in another way, that shouldn't be criticized or contradicted other. You can go the other way and make it into some other kind of political philosophy about what we should do, what we shouldn't do. You should do what you see. You should relate to things as they are, insofar as the culture will let you, insofar as your enculturation or your upbringing will let you. And how do you do that? You sit down and look at the door that's closed. Look at the Dharma gate, look at the Dharma door. And if you sit down and look at this wall, I'm not saying the first week, the first month, the first year, but eventually that door is going to open. Doors have a tendency to do that. That door will open and you'll begin to see, not what I'm telling you, you'll be able to see who you really are, and you will, another way of saying it, you will resume your original face, which is the Zen Buddhist way of talking about it. You'll see your original face before your parents' birth. That's available. But if it seems to be covered up by conclusions and hopes and fears and concepts and ideas and nationalism and intense structures of society.
Is eating living beings harm?
The first words that the Buddha said, as far as we know, was life is suffering. There's nerve endings everywhere. So living beings come along and we're hungry. And so a plant is a living being, and there's nothing to say, or don't misunderstand, I'm not saying it's okay to kill plants and it's not okay to kill animals. To take any position on that is a misunderstanding. Just be aware of that, and then you'll see where this is for you. The idea to make some kind of a protocol or some kind of a eating living beings is harm, or doing anything like this is harm. To come to a conclusion about it is a misunderstanding. Do it with the awareness. So for me to respond to that in yes or no, I'm getting in the way of your insight. I'm becoming, you follow me? I'm getting in the way of it. You need to bring your beating heart to that situation. And then your karma that is extremely extensive. We can't count the number of tributary streams that are flowing in the darkness that have to be flowing in order for this Buddhist monk to be here and ask that question. We tend to ignore all of that. And go ahead. I don't know where I was going with the and, but something vanished. Yes.
Is there a choice that's not separate?
So the way I talk about it is choicelessness, and it's not that you can't choose to pick this up and put it over here, or put it back, or walk out of the room, or you have choices that are happening all the time, but the background of that, which is what people miss, is that things have already pushed on this, pushed on that, and this, and this, and this, and suddenly we have a piece of wood here, we have a hand here, all dependently arisen. And so the choiceless part of it is so many things have come about before we even got to the point where we're here, and I have a choice to pick that up. Should I pick it up or not? So the imputation there is that you have some kind of control because you can do this. But we're ignoring the tree this came out of. We're ignoring where these hands came from. 75, 80 years ago, which I'm not 80 yet, these hands weren't here. That tree, there was a tree growing somewhere with this wood inside of it, this piece of shaped wood. So I'm just saying it in that way to say that everything, this is a very simple example, everything is functioning like that. So when we get to the point of making a choice, everything is choiceless in that all of the causes and conditions that arise as your self-centeredness, your ego, your tendency to like this and not like that, and be selective about this and want more of this but less of that, all of the politics of experience that are happening with you personally to protect who you are, protect your image of yourself, are operating in such a way that they're behind that. But since they're invisible to you or to me, that it looks like we're making a decision. Well, you got to make the right choices. No, I would say it a different way. You need to really be aware of what choices are. You need to be aware of how choices arise, and the way to someone who is Buddhas and sentient beings. Buddhas are sentient beings. It's choiceless because they're at the mercy of their karma. Like you can't just decide to have more intelligence. I mean, AI is working on that, but you can't just decide to just go against the causes and conditions unless you have some kind of strategy for changing the shape of your toenails. Some kind of way that, if I just work on this, I can get this to happen. I'm being silly, but sometimes that's the only kind of metaphor that really shows up as, shows how kind of absurd it is. So sentient beings, or people who are confused, human beings who are confused about and think they're separate beings, are at the mercy of their karma, just like you didn't have a choice to be born, you're here. If you could have had some say-so, you might have been taller, thinner, smarter, it might have been a different sex. Some people have a lot of trouble in that area. And the society gives them even more trouble with it because they want standards, And then one who is awake or clear, they maybe function out of choicelessness because they're not functioning out of their thought process of I want it, I don't want it, I don't care. They're functioning out of whatever's showing up. So they actually are, to be not deliberately poetic, but they're actually dancing with the situation. So if someone asks for help, they help them, but they don't cross a boundary into their idea of what help is. They say, how can I help you? Well, I don't know, but I need help. Then you would wait. Wait. Don't do anything unless you have to. Mind your own business. Don't meddle with anyone. Your opinions about anything are dependently arisen. They might have a little bit of truth to that, but a lot of times that little bit of truth we're looking for is something that can reify the complete shakiness of the self-centeredness. It can come in and kind of butter over, put a patina over the narcissism, so it doesn't look quite so bad. Well, at least I'm this, or at least I try to help people. This is self-deception. And awareness practice reveals that self-deception so we can see the way we're trying to become something when the actual situation we already are is before becoming. It's before becoming doesn't occur to the sage or the realized being or the Buddha. Michelle?
What is our Buddha nature?
Not separate. Not separate from anything. Just because you're looking out through this, the corner of that, the zendo there is you're not separate from that. Just like you're looking at me, and you're not separate from your fingernails. Fingernails are part of your body, but there's no nerve endings there. Just an interesting situation. There's nerve endings right behind that. Have a hangnail, then you'll know about that. More? Shoto.
Can we discriminate intelligently?
That's the only way you can do it. Because otherwise, it's just chaos and brutality on different levels. There's a Buddhist teachings, and I don't know the fancy description or even understanding of it. Discriminating awareness wisdom. It's the wisdom that sees the differences between things, doesn't pick and choose, but just relates to things. One is lower, one is higher. One is moving this way, one is moving that way. So it's a discriminating awareness that sees deeply into the apparent separation at the same time not losing track of that fundamentally nothing is separate. That every time you see the separation, you at the same time, discriminating awareness wisdom, you immediately see that they're completely of a piece. They're all, it's just one, it's warp and woof is a good example in fabric. It's one cloth and made up of lots of parts. And the little parts scream out for some kind of identity. Me, look at me. And as Trungpa Rinpoche says in his cutting through spiritual material or something, people on the path, it's like vegetables boiling in a pot. The practice is like putting your carrot self into the pot and boiling, and then you come up and the one who's stirring the pot says, "Get down, you're too yellow." I think he says it something like that. So it takes and the initial feeling of that, I know when I first began practicing years ago, was very frightening that I would be nobody, that this was scary. If I keep doing this, I'm not going to be anybody. What that is a misunderstanding of what somebody is. Sokuzan.
There was a question that came up on YouTube while I was watching in the other room, and the question was, what is the best way to work with the constant fear of collapsing into one's karma?
Collapse into the karma. And do it with an awareness practice. This doesn't mean go out and, I get this terrible karma of wanting to kill people. It doesn't mean go out and killing people. It means relate to the emotions, the feelings of that, but do it with a disciplined mind rather than a random, chaotic, fear-based mind that's running around greedy for help. Greedy for help. So actually go into the karma, go into this wall. Our simple way of saying it, sit down and hold still and look at that and actually become a receiver of the karma, the same, and learn how to receive the world in the same way you receive your karma. It's not easy. I don't know if I would not be here without the help of my teachers. So, and not that they did anything for me, they just elbowed me hard. But I first had to get close enough to them for that to even happen. More? That just came in?
There's a live
Yeah.
chat box
Yeah.
on the YouTube, and it came in through the chat box.
Okay. Andrew.
How is taking responsibility for our emotions different from taking credit for our successes?
Very similar. So taking credit for the success is kind of pride. Pride may, depending on the person, pride may show up because of your wiring, may show up pretty obvious to other people, or it may show up as just your own interior kind of acknowledging that you're pretty good at this, probably better than most people. But I don't want to be blowing my own horn, so I'll just know that and I won't say anything about it. And the other way around would be, about being critical of your negativity, your emotions. Let's say, just as I'm not sure I'm in the same area that you're referring to, but say we have prejudice of black people. Say there's some kind of prejudice. To try to shut that down and not be prejudiced is a mistake. You have to acknowledge that prejudice is there, and because if you don't acknowledge it, then it goes underground and finds its way into other areas and makes us even more blank about the plight of what certain aspects of the civilization have done to black people, to indigenous people, and just all over the place. So we have to be aware that we have to be aware of that and not try to fix it. It's just like if you have neurosis, don't do anything with it, because if you start to meddle with that area, then that whole structure starts to say it in a.
It doesn't ramp up and it seems to become more subtle. Is it just going underground?
Could be. Good question. Don't follow it. It's a trap. It's a trap that the ego thinks it can get better by, well, I'm really going to think about this and really get in and understand this deeply. It's always on the surface. The surface is the depth. Go ahead.
So when you say don't follow it, do you mean don't follow it underground and try to track it?
Yes. Yes. Just that. Just whatever it shows up as, that's it. It's almost like ignorance. That's why delusion and awakening are not two separate things.
I'm trying to follow what you mean by it's almost like ignorance.
Well, ignorance anytime you have a polarity, the one side of the polarity gets its, to be literal, gets its meaning or its strength from its opposition. It's called warfare. And when that is understood deeply, then delusion and awakening are not two separate things anymore. There's just this, and it's not separate. And it feels like the ego gets threatened because it feels like it's going into some area where it's not going to have any say-so, and it's not. It's going to have very little. Go ahead. You're just full of questions here, Michael.
What happens to delusion or the imputation of delusion if one awakens?
It's not separate from the clarity. Clarity about delusion is clarity. Delusion about delusion is delusion. Delusion about clarity, what am I going to say? I don't either. You can't find it. You can't. I mean, we can use this, and there's some intelligence, very intelligent people that are able to take this and take it down. So, it's 15 notches above where I can reach. I don't have that much intellectual clarity, but I know what I'm looking at. And what is it? Not separate. And that's where this is. Whatever is arising here, that has all of you falling asleep, is coming from this understanding that can't be explained. Yes.
What do you mean by delusion about delusion is delusion?
Is that unclear? Reflect on it rather than go for me to go further. Just reflect on that. Everyone is doing that. But to become aware of that, something starts to change. You can't really step on the path unless that started to show up to some extent. That you're unclear about what you're unclear about. That's something starting to some kind of light or some kind of ventilation is starting to come into that dark cellar. Go ahead.
I've been reading Susan Segal's Collision with the Infinite, and the way that she describes that detachment that happened to her from her body. Is that delusion?
Well, I don't know. All I know about Susan Segal is that she did not have a strong practice and didn't have a teacher, so that's why she had her standing at a bus stop, her identity dropped away, and it was terrifying to her because their consciousness is still there. So consciousness doesn't mean just because you don't have a solid self anymore that you aren't going to be aware, but then who is aware? And you could feel even more threatened because it had happened it happened instantly. Sometimes I say, to people talking about gradual and instant awakening, you better go for the gradual. Instant could be terrifying. It's like Jiddu, or not Jiddu, but U.G. Krishnamurti referred to his awakening, which was spontaneous and like that, as the calamity. everything just fell apart. It's a calamity. It's a terrible situation to happen in an instant. But she didn't have she just had the dropping away. She didn't have any, there's no form. I think she had practiced meditation a little bit. I'm not saying that she hadn't practiced some, but she had no real, she immediately went, instead of going to a meditation teacher who might have been able to help her, somebody who had some experience with working with consciousness, not with ideas about consciousness, working with consciousness. She went to psychologists and, I don't know, counselors and tried everything she could to try to get rid of that or cure it, instead of go to somebody who had said, well, good for you. A lot of people are looking for that. Might have changed her whole dynamic a little bit. Have her immediately run down on Harshi that happened to him, and because of the society he was in, India, that supports a spiritual path pretty strongly, he had that similar kind of awakening, and at age 18, and went into Arunachala Mountain, into a cave in Tiruvannamalai, and stayed in there for 20 years, and deepened his understanding. So, I don't know what he did. I just read about it.
In the case of Susan realizing or waking up, how would a meditation teacher have helped someone who realizes?
Well, I don't know many meditation teachers. But if she came to me, I mean, it would be hypothetical, of course. I would put her in solitary retreat immediately, and then I would check on her once a month. That's a powerful thing to happen to somebody spontaneously. It doesn't happen often. Meditators get flashes of this, but then if they try to cling to it, then it goes away. Well, she was in a situation where she was trying to cling to the previous consciousness that she had. Was I'm Susan, I'm waiting for my bus, and when the hell's he going to get here? Instead, it's like there isn't anyone. There's no Susan Segal, yet there's a sixth sense heals, and there are objects all pouring in on her from everywhere, and her not being separate from anything or anyone. Overwhelming. More? Further questions?
Do we have control over how much we cling to a self?
In the conventional sense, clinging, probably not. Maybe a little. Probably not. It's necessary, just like the way I teach about, instead of saying, let go, just let go. Just, be here now. Just let go. I say, look at how you cling. Look at the way you have your fingers of your mind all laced around something, so there's no way you're going to be ripped away from me, and my agenda, and my feelings, my emotions, how much I suffer, how great I am, or any of that. If you look at that, then you begin to see you have to see the clinging first before you're going to see what? The clinger, not Klingon. That's a story I wrote a long time ago. That wasn't very successful. You see the clinger. Would be a good title for a Dharma talk. Clinger. So here we are, and we see that, and then causes and conditions, dependent origination coming from everywhere, from your karma, from your body, speech, mind complex, from your mom and dad, from all the things that have come and gone down through the centuries. All that is there, then there's no one there to release that. If you do it, if you let go without seeing what it is, then you release it, artificially, you release it as a concept. You are the one who is releasing this. And that might feel okay for a while. If you have a strong form to help you let go, which go on YouTube, it's all over the place. How to feel better, how to be happy, or whatever. So look, it's always about awareness. Look at the clinging, look at the way the fingers of your mind are laced around the ignorance. And then, if there's going to be a possibility, then it just starts to relax, because it doesn't get the fuel of being objected to, agreed with, or ignored. What does it get? The brilliance of your wisdom mind, which you can't see. If you can see your own brilliance or your own wisdom mind, then this is ego. You have a question? You scratch your ear? You want to know why you scratch your ear?
Yeah.
Do you know?
Why is he scratching your ear?
Yeah.
Well, she has an itch.
Coming to conclusion.
But I'm
Two-
not a Klingon.
Two Leos clinging. Further questions?
I actually have a real.
Go ahead. You have a real question. Go
Well,
ahead.
that wasn't a question, but anyway. What was it now? Is that faith?
What?
Not being able to see the brilliance of your wisdom mind?
Is it faith?
Yeah.
Faith is even more unfindable than that. You're not going to be able to find, in this tradition, I'm not saying that there aren't other people who say otherwise, but from the way it looks here, and I've been looking for a while, it's not something you can find. But it could be something that you are. You don't have that. You are that. So it might have to come up with another word, like just make something up. Make up a word. What?
Itchy.
Itchy.
Yeah.
Itchy? Yeah, it's not going to work. Okay, thank you so much.
We'll stand and dedicate the merit in the back of our yellow chant books, and I'd like to remind everybody about the donation boxes in the hallway. We appreciate and depend on your support ongoingly. We also welcome any monthly subscriptions in small and large amounts, which can be done online via PayPal. We also receive checks in the mail, cash. Appreciate your help as much as you can.
Please come down out of the light and protect Sokukoji Buddhist Temple Monastery, our Sangha, families, friends, and visitors. Heal everyone who is unhappy, sick, or suffering.